seems to constantly change itself, and sometimes I try and determine that, but most of the time it seems to determine itself. And so that willingness to be more fluid in the way we act as an organisation is actually a direct result of being a designer, right? Because I think we're comfortable with that. Some people, when they look at Ideo, don't feel very comfortable with it, but we feel comfortable with that fluidity.
Okay. So you mentioned in your book Ideo's maxim that all of us are smarter than any of us. What do you see as the role of teamwork in design thinking, and how should this change the way people work in businesses and in school?
Well, as I said before, I think it's one of the fundamental characteristics of an innovation culture is the ability to collaborate and learn from each other. Because the fact is, you can chart any idea, no matter how much it appears to have been an idea that's come from an individual. It actually was the result of iterations of ideas, it's some of our most, I think I write about it in the book, a couple of the more famous creative characters in our history, both Leonardo da Vinci and Picasso, were famous for stealing other people's ideas, and fully admitted that they did, and recommended it as a way of being creative. So this notion that ideas are they're more like networks of things than they are these kind of closed objects, has been the case for creativity and for innovation and the arts and design forever, for hundreds of years. And so it seems to me that if that's true, then you want to do everything you can to make people as effective as they can be when they're collaborating. And that doesn't just mean the people inside your own organisation, but also the way you collaborate with the outside world, the way you learn from the outside world. And, we work quite hard to try and open ourselves up to the outside world. And so we've just, for instance, launched just a few weeks ago a new what we call an open innovation platform. So it's called Open Ideo, and essentially it's a social networking site that you can go to actually contribute to our projects. Mm-hmm. All of the projects are social innovation projects. So they're about childhood obesity, or they're about the future of education, or about environmentalism, and we have currently about 6,500 people around the world actually working on our projects. And that's kind of a fairly intense form of collaboration. If any of you want to join, you're welcome to. It's open to anybody that wants to contribute. So go check it out. It's quite good fun to see some of the stuff.
Okay. What do you think will be the next generation's biggest problem to deal with, and how do you think they should address it?
I'm going to answer that question in two different ways, because I think the next generation has got the problem of inheriting a lot of serious problems that our generation and previous generations have dumped on you, in the sense of the kind of the state of the world. But I also think you have a challenge of fundamentally that we as a society we have to fundamentally change the way we think about those problems also, and that's almost as difficult as the challenges are themselves. So. On the first topic, the first half, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure whether it's. I think it's climate change is the most complex problem that we're dealing with today. I don't believe personally that we'll actually solve the climate change problem in the sense that we will put so many mitigating innovations in place that we won't rise the temperature of the planet. We won't get rising sea levels and harder to deal with weather and unpredictable agriculture. And I think whatever we do, a bunch of those things are going to happen because they're already happening. So, but I think what we'll end up with is, on the one hand, lots of interesting challenges around how we slow that rate of change down, and on the other hand, lots of interesting challenges around how we come up with ways of dealing with the problems as they occur. The way, how are we going to prevent the bay kind of lapping up at our doors? Do we put a big dam under the Golden Gate Bridge, or how are we going to deal with it? So there'll be big challenges around climate change. I think there are some other very big challenges out there around chronic health. Is the other one that I think is most obvious today. That at one level, you have the challenge of a generation that some people are predicting that your generation, maybe it's my generation too, will be the first that has a lower lifespan than our parents, because of things like obesity and chronic disease. That's not great, right? I mean, none of us really want that. Right? And so dealing with chronic disease, both from a cost perspective and a quality of life perspective, that's a pretty big thing to deal with. Healthcare is really important. And there's a bunch of others. It's an unfortunately long list of those things. If you want to think about it as, boy, the world's a tough place. On the other hand, if you want to think of it as, man, there's some fantastically exciting things to get your kind of teeth into and grapple with, whether you're interested in science or whether you're interested in sort of social stuff, whether you're interested in design and creativity. It's just lots of ways of accessing those problems. Back to the other half of the challenge that I see facing, which is that we've spent the last 400 years or so, no, 300 years, sorry, since the Enlightenment, developing a way of thinking about these problems that was very top-down. I call it a Newtonian way of thinking about problems, right? I mean, so what Newton gave us was a way of predicting what was going to happen in the world, and a way of understanding problems from a top-down perspective. And that approach has kind of worked its way into almost everything we do. As a designer, I was taught that way. You've been educated that way. And the world and business thinks that way. The trouble is, or the interesting thing is, today we're actually in a different kind of world. And so, I talk about it as a shift from Newton to Darwin. That it's actually this shift from a way of thinking in a top-down, if you like, physics-based way, to a bottom-up biology-based way. I don't know if there are any biologists or anybody interested in biology in the room, but I really do think that the emergence of these new technologies around biology and the ways of thinking that biology is giving us a new way to think about complex problems. And so I think that's a really interesting challenge that many of us will have to go through, is to shift the way we think about problems and problem solving, the way we think about science, the way we think about education, the way we think about design. And that's another one of these. I'm kind of excited to get my teeth into that one too.
Okay. Another thing you discuss in your book is that teams of design thinkers need to be interdisciplinary, not multidisciplinary. Could you explain this distinction and how you think it should affect the way that people are educated?
So I've had many experiences in my career of working on a project, walking into a room of experts, trying to decide what to do about a problem. And everybody's an expert in their own field, and is only interested in defending the perspective from their own field. And you end up with the results of that debate or collaboration is usually some intensely uninteresting compromise. And everything is you see this in kind of politics all the time, right? You see this in the kind of negotiations between states. Everything's a sort of a zero-sum game, right? In order for me to win in my point of view, you've got to lose your point of view. Okay? I choose to use this vocabulary, but that's my interpretation of the multidisciplinary world. The interdisciplinary world is a world in which people are still expert in their craft or in their discipline, but they have a passion and interest in other people's disciplines also, to the point that they can understand them and they can work with them. And it becomes what I call a non-zero sum, where the collaboration between these people who are interdisciplinary creates ideas and possibilities that could not have existed without that collaboration. And so I mean, maybe it may be to me, but I think I like to think that I've got a discipline I'm expert at, but I'm fascinated by and want to understand many of the disciplines that contribute to what I do. I think in terms of education, I mean, one thing that's interesting is, I think you should realize, is that it's one place where the United States actually does pretty well against many of the other parts of the developed world. I mean, in Europe, where I